There are 4 books that I believe everyone should read. The Prince is one of them. If you can read with comprehension, you will not be manipulated after reading this book. As long as someone has reading comprehension. Apparently they can't read anymore. It's amazing how you can't read with comprehension. The other is the Decameron. Third 120 Days of Sodom. Provided someone knows the historical background of this book. The movie was gross. These references to World War II were not needed. It ruined the whole point of the book. It starts to get funny when you discover that at some point there are too many hands for the rest of the body. It was supposed to be satire, but it was received badly. The Art of War, by Sun Tzu. Although that Niccolo won't hurt either. Even in the 19th century, psychology was part of neurology, and mental disorders were associated with nerve disorders. This is often the case, just as mental illnesses often result from genetics, or are symptoms of genetic diseases. Over time, this began to change. And we can safely say that at present there is no more dangerous science that can do more harm than good, although it can hardly be called science, because in fact it is a convention. These are theses. No one has ever checked what is really in the human head. Psychology has always conformed to social norms, and social systems departed from human nature long ago. We owe the separation of psychology from neurology to writers. They initiated spiritual analysis. Dostoevsky, Gogol, Edgar Allan Poe, E. Hoffman. Many will probably be offended now, but Freud's biography definitely indicates that he should start his research with himself. This is quite common with psychologists. They cannot apply their theories to themselves. If someone to advise you on how to live, he cannot apply these theories to himself, do not cross that door. No different from a charlatan. Exemples. Then let's begin. At least a friend who always talked a lot and was scatterbrained. As a result, she led to an accident in which she broke leg, but her friend died. A psychologist, she drinks and takes psychiatric treatment. Next example. The psychologist is getting divorced. Her son starts taking drugs. He will die stoned a few years after her death. She herself starts drinking because of the divorce, but at the same time she runs an office and officially helps to get over the addiction. At the end, she is incapacitated by her family. The gentleman asking how do you feel, taking a huge amount of money for this question and bragging about it around town. The only advice is yeah. A bottle in the desk. There are many. And these are just people I know personally. I wasn't a customer and I wouldn't leave them a cent. Friends of my parents are family members. The only good thing about my father dying is that I could completely shut out certain people. In my father's family, always the one who is unable to give an inheritance is something worse. Spouses are not family, because they are not. Your brother's wife is not family to you. Family is a relative term. Who cares about genes if you see these people at funerals and don't even know their name? Freud was a sex addict and obsessed with hysteria and its treatment with masturbation. It's not being added now, but in the past people masturbated in public to relieve their pain. In fact, every inconvenient wife was hysterical. This is how Cece's sister Sophie D. Alencon was placed in the psychiatric ward. For sure she left that place not Norma, although was normal before Cross the Gates. She was much more sane than her sister, the famous Empress. The inconvenient man was a sodomite. People with genetic defects such as porphyria are still misdiagnosed to this day, because it is simply cheaper for the state to send someone like that to a psychologist, although a kidney test would save lives. Many depressions are undiagnosed porphyrias. General practitioners talk about it, but going to the couch is fashionable, and countries with poor healthcare funding will do everything to treat you as cheaply as possible. In humans, depression may indeed have a hormonal background, but it does not have to be related to the uterus or testicles, but for example a defect of the adrenal cortex. A much more important endocrine gland. However, to test the hormones, they should be checked daily or hourly. It's expensive. Great Britain will do such research, some German states and even Russia for the rich, but Central Europe, forget it. There are hormonal allergies. Your aunt has been red thanks thyroid for a few days now. Her tests were done in the Republic, but doctors there not accept her treatment, simply they have no that medicament or use that medicament for something different, and they are not going to treat her and do again medical check for that. write a prescription for expensive cosmetics. Certainly, the pharmaceutical company will thank you for your loyalty. Good trip. The magic of the Geneva Convention. Propaganda that refugees from countries affected by armed conflict can be treated first broke in that case. This is not said to quarrel people who have a right to feel bad when they wait 2 years to see the dentist and the foreigner goes the next day. This results from international agreements. The country's propaganda that it works great is certainly in it as well. People will say that the health service is working great. To the citizen, the ambulance will confuse the village. Freud was a student of Charcot. Favorite student. The two had a different approach to the matter. Charcot saw only neurology and hysteria, and Freud maintained that something else is responsible. He called the subconscious. In fact, Freud did not invent anything new. We can safely call this subconscious was the soul. It does not have much influence in everyday monotonous life. It can be said that someone who considered himself a scientist finally called it, and that's how the marginalized and often ridiculed being found its way into scientific books. At the same time, the subconscious became the territory into which dreams, inexplicable disturbances of consciousness, all phenomena of human nature that have not yet been described were relegated. Freud didn't even have the vocabulary to describe these behaviors. All the more, he did not have the background or sufficient knowledge to interpret and understand. You could say that demonic possession was named by Freud, but not tamed. Many after him have failed as well. There was no point in pulling the superego out of the ego, and Freud managed to see that in his lifetime. Not everyone has a conscience, an inner policeman. He had no answer to that. He himself was one big sex drive that he never got over. It was his mania. We can say that his world revolved around his ass. The modern one tends to do just that as well. The butt becomes the center of the world. Freud wins after centuries, but he is still stuck in mistakes, which is proven by criminology as well. Sex, defecation and eating, and as well not Freudian job which can put here, are not the only things a living being needs. Although living beings are beginning to be reduced to this, and what is worse, people believe that this is how it should be. For people of the Freudian era, it was like discovering a new continent. People began to search for themselves. Even with fanaticism they began to submit to the new trend. Freud, on the other hand, like a high priest, made his science an independent discipline and did everything to be at the top, at least for a while. The psychologist began to perform not only the function of the former alchemist or magician, but also a confessor. The difference is that even today the secret of confession does not apply to them, although people think that it does. Medical confidentiality has always been selective. A doctor is exempt from it, if he suspects suicide or a crime. A fairly well-known case of a woman who had an abortion where it's forbidden to do, and bragged about it to her psychologist. And she, in accordance with her conscience, reported her patient to the police. Even if it was a provocation. It reminded people that certain things are better confided in your own dog, in any deity, or in a priest. Personal trainers in many countries are not subject to this law, because it is still a profession not defined by law. Freud was a sex addict and obsessed with it. His philosophy boils down to sex or hypnosis, although he admitted that not everyone can be hypnotized. He already believed that the infant suckled the woman, because of the sex drive. There's only one problem with this. How then to explain homosexuality? This is the opposite of his thesis. Everyone would have to be either homosexual or heterosexual. Where would the next generations come from? Biological hermaphroditism, Freud did not assume at all, because and why. In his day, it was even more of a freak than it is today. I'm talking about genetics, not someone made up to be someone. These environments were indeed persecuted in Western Europe and America. However, recently you can hear a myth that also Soviet countries and satellites. It's nonsense, but I understand that Western countries want to whitewash themselves. Sexuality is probably the only thing that really didn't interest the government in those countries. Just because people didn't scream out loud, "I'm gay," doesn't mean they were persecuted for it. On the contrary, in these countries you did not go to prison for sex. There was also no Nazism in Tsarist Russia legitimized by the government, which can often be heard from the French and Spaniards. They really need to whiten themselves. More and more often we read that under Vichy there were no deportations of Jews. They sold them like nobody else. Let's not forget that Tevje Bielski's only Jewish guerrilla was established in the Soviet territories. He is a controversial person, but this is not this episode. However, it is hard not to admit that Lenin was a Jew sent by Kaiser Wilhelm to destroy Russia, just like Rasputin. As the old saying goes, there were 3 cousins, broken as much as possible by beloved Grandma Victoria, but only one had what the rest never had, a loving family. The other 2 envied him. Nobody hides it anymore. Sexuality was simply not discussed in Soviet countries and was a private matter. Biology didn't talk much about it either. On some issues, it can be said that unfortunately, because sexual awareness in these countries, especially in terms of venereal diseases, is worse than in the Middle East. There were a lot of gay artists, everyone knew about it, but no one shouted about it. Today, in turn, in matters related to sexuality, there is an inclination. It is truly pathetic when we ascribe homosexuality to historical figures. Especially museums, starts to play such things, or palaces of famous people, cutting out some statements, or declaring that someone was homosexual because he did not have a wife. I'm waiting for Frederick the Great to be gay, although he describes himself as asexual in his texts. He wasn't interested in sex at all. People like that exist too. First of all, even in the times of the greatest Nazism, I don't remember anyone having to go to a museum with an I am gay badge. Museums, operas and theaters did not check it. You cannot make a historical person a homosexual in order to fit in with some ideological trend, if we do not have confirmation for this. We will not ask these people about their orientation, and we should admire someone like Eugene de Savoy for his political and military strategy and the beginning of the unification of Italy, not what he did in bed. Because these achievements are still taught in schools, and his military techniques are still used. Cult, for the basic activity of sex. Soon we will lead to the cult of someone eating something. Sex is a private matter and indeed should not be of interest to anyone more than your partner. People meanwhile went from one extreme to the other. Zoophilia, necrophilia, pedophilia are not allowed even by Satanists. It's hard to even call it anything other than a perversion. Zoophilia is not natural even for reasons of biological laws. I myself witnessed a patient tell the doctor that he tasted iron when he swallowed. This is a sign of a diseased liver. Maybe even cirrhosis. I'm surprised the doctor waved his hand. To go to medical school you need a secondary school with extended biology and chemistry. We finish the same type of school, and then some go to treat cows and others people. Contrary to what some say, we are not much different between both, and animals also have an emotional life. And they do not attach themselves to a man for food. Especially cats will leave a terrible home. Forget about taking care of sensitive data in Eastern Europe. It exists on paper. This is also due to this fragmentation of knowledge that we talked about in the previous episode. Rarely does a doctor have general knowledge, but he has specializations. Year by year it is getting worse and we have more and more stupid people in every field, even harmful in some, but strutting like peacocks with their diplomas. In the past, bragging about a diploma was not welcome. They're framed now, and there's nothing worse than a guy on the first date starting to list what schools he went to. Run away from that person. Pride, you'll never be satisfied. Yes, it's proven. This is most often done by people who have been promoted too quickly to influential positions and come from the lower classes. A cultured man can talk to both the prime minister and the cleaning lady. Without self-exaltation. Only culture does not go hand in hand with a diploma, but with a home. People often forget this. Freud had no idea about Zoroaster and Mazdaism, or if you prefer fire worshippers, or Zoroastrianism. He used a name that he had heard somewhere, and one might even say that he has disgraced their holy book. It is also a period of fashion for Orientalism. People heard something and borrowed something, they created something that was supposed to refer to the Orient, but it was distorted and had nothing to do with the Orient. The era of archaeological research was beginning, but knowledge was about to come. When the race started, just before the First War. War of scientists, historians. Who will dig more and take away as much as possible? The truth is also that they took advantage of the then ignorance of the locals. Freud greatly damaged his science by wanting to make it an independent field at all costs. In effect, this is yet another manifestation of the fragmentation of knowledge, and this was increasingly underscored by Freud's belief that it was a legitimate science, applying scientific methodology and dealing with incomprehensible phenomena in the same way as if they had specific measurables like biology or chemistry. Freud had ambitions for scientific objectivity, but the only instrument by which man can know anything is the brain. The brain can be very biased, especially to ourselves or to someone we dislike. The most paradoxical pseudoscience was created, which people just loved. Its creator himself was a paradox. Freud was aware of this, but completely rejected these arguments. Like most psychologists today, instead, he started creating procedures. And so a psychologist, like a surgeon, analyzes, divides and fragments reality into smaller and smaller fragments. At the same time trying to prove that something that is not science is. Freud himself began to confirm the errors in this field, and he did not apply his dogmas to himself. However, it was his friend who did the most evil in the new field. Carl Jung. Jung hated religion for the simple reason that he was the son of a fanatical Calvinist pastor. Jung quickly fell in love with such ideologues as Nietzsche, Schopenhauer and Kant. Especially the first one was a role model for him. At the same time, the most sacred book was Faust. Jung developed a theory that he was descended from a writer. According to him, a psychotherapist should also understand himself. If the doctor doesn't know how to deal with himself, he won't teach the patient anything. For this you need a training analysis. I don't think anyone here has any objections. Until we get to the training analysis. The first part of Jung's statement is often overlooked, which is a pity, because it would spare a world of charlatans and extortionists. With the training analysis, the problem of the objectivity of perception arises again. Jung quickly became a psychiatrist and tried to apply Freud's methods. However, the more he delved into total madness, the more he discovered that Freud's dogmatism could be wrong. This was partly due to the rivalry between the two men. In his clinical work, he often emphasized the integration of the psyche to achieve a harmonious balance between the functions and processes of the mind. If the mind is the only tool of cognition, then fragmented it perceives reality in a similarly fragmented way. The mind must first attain the whole. However, Jung tried to combine a multitude of principles that were in fact inconsistent. It was Jung who decided that religion, mythology, fairy tales, fantasies were equated with madness. And thus began the most dangerous current of philosophy in history, which was to lead to Nazism of the 20th century. Jung fell in love with Hermetic. He considered himself Paracelsus. It is to him that we owe such concepts as introversion, extroversion, or a very dangerous archetype. At one point, Jung turned from a rationalist into a superstitious person who restored old superstitions, considering them science. Jung, like Freud, had serious problems with self-analysis. Obsessed with competition with Freud. He demanded power and respect for himself, and since there were already many in that era who were considered gods in the field, they could overthrow him. And so modern psychology, especially at universities, has degenerated into a superficial, statistical study of conditioned reflexes and patterns of behavior. Let's mark patterns in accordance with social norms, so that everyone can live pleasantly in the world, and outsiders do not ask difficult questions, do not undermine the system of the world, or are ultimately destroyed, because simply they are dangerous for them, not for the world, which is in fact chaos. These people don't understand that. They are prepared to put everything in frame. Students learn for years to be human trainers. Exactly, trainers. Over time, psychology under the proud name of behavioristics was to enter the animal world. The problem is that those who understood the nature of animals from observation cannot be published because they were Nazis, ex-Lorenz, Mengele. Before they became geneticists, they were behaviorists. Nobody will publish them. Although Mengele laid the foundations for modern medicine. In a cruel way, but it was knowledge that kept him protected until death. Huge amounts of money are spent on proving that a dog that is punished when it barks will eventually learn to purr because someone wants it to. The same goes for people. With the help of punishments, a man is supposed to keep quiet. They will tell him what to think using media. The media around the world manipulates people. What's worse, they give dangerous theories, choosing from them very catchy fragments that are not dangerous at first glance, only when we know the rest of the statement, or we go deeper. He's supposed to think that way, not otherwise. Otherwise he will be crushed. This applies to any system, although there will certainly be shouters that this is not the case. They don't even know how much they've been taught to purr by punishment. The famous actor is accused of saying that people follow the line and don't become what they want to be. He told the truth, and already the school teaches them to follow the line. This line is creeping more and more into our private lives. States are interfering more and more, and so are scientists. They even tell us what sexual orientation we should be, preferably other than traditional. The problem is that a person's sexual orientation is determined in the genotype in the second month of pregnancy. Pretty soon. Yes, only humans can mutate that gene. Then the orientation during the puberty process will be inconsistent with the sex. Simply you born like that, contrary to what the internet tries to say. If someone likes to call it a genetic defect, let them call it that, although I believe that there are no genetic defects. It's the diversity of the world. Thanks to this, it is not boring. However, you can't just say to yourself, I'm going to be a lesbian today. If someone can say that to themselves, and one day is hetero, lesbian, or gay, or have no idea who are, then they should start medical treatment. It is impossible to say and become someone. The orientation is shaped in the belly. Animal attacks from behind have no sexual overtones, and are a typical symptom of dominance. The master of the territory reminds the lower status individual who is in charge here. Just like that, animals also knock down their prey in hunting. It's about hitting the ground. Animal knockout, and it's not homosexuality. Your cat will not be homosexual because you are. He has no idea about it. However, he has other problems. How to survive with an increasingly crazy human who treats everything that lives as an object, because in the end God gave him the right, because management, in translation, was changed to reign. Nietzsche wanted to revolutionize all values, and he succeeded. It was his motto that development is hampered by the weak that laid the foundations of modern Nazism. And it continues to circulate around the world in changed forms. All norms in corporations, rat races, we owe to the Nazis and him. Above all, however, we owe him the Holocaust. And back to worship. Sartre, on the other hand, has given us full responsibility for what is happening in our lives. Only in his wonderful philosophy there is also one flaw, which therapists do not mention when inserting his quotes on their profiles. You are not responsible for some things in life. You are not responsible for the fact that you were born in a poor family and fate has made you doomed to a worse start. Learning has always cost. It costs a lot today. You are not responsible for your country being attacked by war and you lose everything. Sartre didn't even have a good excuse for us having to go to work. He considered it slavery, but he tried to explain it by the fact that this norm is imposed by freedom. Freedom, on the other hand, imposes nothing. Nor are you responsible for illnesses that make you unable to work. Then, of course, the idea is one. These should be gotten rid of. Not everything is said about Mrs. Montessori either. The truth is that if her research had not been about eugenics, Mussolini would not have supported her. It is a joke of fate that none of these rediscovered wise men of the world really contributed anything to the recognition of a range of mental illnesses that truly threaten society. Criminologists did it. And here we can delve into the truth of human nature, very contrary to the social norm, and yet existing. None of them considered these diseases, although they supposedly did. And all of them knew full well they existed. Of course there are a few more. I doubt that anyone listens to it to the end and, what's worse, reads their texts from beginning to end, not just quotes of so-called personal trainers taking clever fragments to medias. The yellow book that created Dorian Gray really existed. It's a rebores by Joris Karl Highsmith. It is also the source of a very mystical instrument, the water harmonica, which was fashionable in the 19th century. Eugenics, a concept introduced in 1869 by Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, which concerned the selective breeding of animals to improve species from generation to generation, especially when it comes to inherited characteristics. Over the next years, Galton revised his definition to take into account the specificity of positive eugenics, which encourages more frequent reproduction of the best individuals, and negative eugenics, which discourages the reproduction of less valuable individuals. Nowadays, it is a system of views assuming the possibility of improving the hereditary characteristics of a species, the purpose of which is to create conditions that allow the development of positive hereditary characteristics and limiting negative characteristics. In particular, this applies to hereditary diseases, by creating favorable conditions for the development of individuals with positive genetic characteristics. Eugenics includes combating venereal diseases, occupational hygiene preventive measures, genetic counseling, combating alcoholism, promotion of pro-health behaviors, activities in the field of mental hygiene and conscious parenthood. Eugenics is still messing with our lives. In fact, it is reborn as in the times rightly past. After all, what is this uncritical promotion of sport and crossing borders in it if not the Nazi creation of an ideal Aryan who was not necessarily supposed to think, but was supposed to have physical prowess? So what if doctors warn that not everyone can run marathons, and people over 30 should get tested so as not to die during a marathon, since a personal trainer says otherwise? Eugenics also messes with the lives of animals. Some breeds have been pulled up so much, at the same time with such an incestuous inbreeding, that sure they can run faster, but their senior age begins at the age of 7, and what's interesting, animals start to have genetic diseases that used to concern only humans before. The same can be said about the eternal broadcasts of the same match on 3 different channels. Here again comes the ancient divide and conquer, and bread and circuses. Occupational hygiene and safety, whatever that means, is also eugenics. What interesting do they have to tell us about these subjects in school and compulsory pre-employment courses in some countries? Extremely important things, such as the fact that the kettle can shock us. As if someone did not know it, or how to walk with documents up the stairs. It is eugenics these days that tells women that their reproductive age begins at 40, because medicine has reached a high level. Yes, it succeeded, but fortunately it did not win with death. It is worth considering who will raise our super genetic children when we are gone. It was eugenics that created surrogates, and really places like Ravensbrück. I honestly wonder what feminism has to do with this. Yes, I understand that someone wants to be a surrogate, but how can women talking about being feminists use clinics in India or other poor countries where women are inseminated and carry children, and they do it out of poverty? Some might say it's their own fault. Drive to these villages and see how these surrogates live to understand that she sees little of your money, and most of it is taken by the doctor, and she has no other chance. That their bodies are destroyed because they do it every year. So feminism became a virtue, but for the rich, and the suffragettes were talking about something completely different. These women should be really ashamed to talk about feminism. Of course, with everything in modern medicine, there is huge money behind it. We only fly into space, and the fact that the fetus is formed with the intestines outside the body is still not seen in research. Quite common in both animals and humans. Let's leave the names. We create it for the layman. In some countries, there are medical examinations before getting married that allow you to get married. Not venereal at least. It's also eugenics. The other children are examinated before going to school. Of course, to separate the hearing impaired are those with worse vision from those who are supposedly healthy. It's also eugenics at its worst. Of course, camouflaged under the guise of health. The first genic extermination of the population is undoubtedly what the Spaniards did to the Moriscos and the Jews. Though no one called it a Holocaust at the time. This practice killed more people than the German Holocaust. It was people like the Western Christian Saint Juan de Ribera who first advocated the forced castration of impure blood. It was the Spaniards who introduced the concept of pure blood, which was to take root in Europe for good, with the difference that it is difficult to talk about eugenics here, because these people were guided rather by religious fanaticism. They did not know this concept, although it was eugenics. Reinhard Heydrich developed a system of camps based on a system of great Indian reservations. Let us also not forget about forced castration, especially of the African American or Indian population or in Sweden, in order to prevent the reproduction of inferior people. Heydrich really didn't come up with anything new. He relied on the past. Read and adapted to the new ideology. The camps were really everywhere at that time. We have reservations in America. In the Soviet Union we have a gulag, it's nothing else. On the Isle of Man, which is forgotten, we also have a camp. The Germans certainly pushed this ideology to its peak, but that doesn't mean that something similar didn't exist in other countries. Again with knowledge. Mrs. Heydrich knew nothing, although there were people from those places in her house. The lady from the French fashion house also didn't know that she was hiring. Just so you see, Der Loanger was sent to Belarus. My grandmother gave birth to my father very late. She had 2 children before him. A sister born there died only recently. She was 12 years older. I remember the stories because, yes, my grandmother lived to be 100 years old, but the last 20 years, due to Alzheimer's disease, she remembered only the Tsar's abdication and the Second World War. It was a cruel unit to the extreme. Created from the worst prisoners who were promised freedom and those from the camp who had that something, they were capos. Sorry, there were also Jews in these units. They could play at hunting children, cook people. They burned people alive. He was killed, probably recognized by the Poles, beaten to death. What he deserved. Of course, these fanatics did not get this freedom. So yes, wherever the German went, during the conquest all the way to St. Petersburg, Nazism existed. Local national parties were told that they would receive freedom from the German. However, it was not Nazism sanctioned by the Russian government, but by the German government, because the territories fell under their power as a result of their actions. It is a false accusation to accuse nations from the border of Germany that they sanctioned Nazism. Just like accusing Tsarism of it. It was German. It was with the German that Nazism in its worst form entered. All that stands from this period is German, in these lands. In the US, perhaps the most delicate form of eugenics was green books. The issue of Native Americans is still not settled. It's not, because they probably have a weaker lobby than African Americans. Not to mention the indigenous people of Hawaii have a problem with voting. Native Americans are treated badly on both continents. Although it was a Native American who started the first revolution in history, which was to create a modern state, according to the modern understanding of the concept, and those who call themselves the creators of the American Revolution in the West forget, or even do not want to remember someone like José Gabriel Condorcaki. Unfortunately for the young generation, who are in love with all these personal advisors, those who remember the war and the times rightly past leave this world or have Alzheimer's. There are no more meetings with these people, perhaps on purpose so that they don't say what certain things remind them of. All these genetic tests, check how much a Longobard is in you. It's impossible to tell, because it was a mixed nation, about which we talked about in the episode about Marbod and rescued that part of world before Roman Empire. What's so funny, Germans are the first so mixed nation, created thanks to our inhabitants resulting from the migration of peoples. Goths, people who also moved from the Baltic area to Spain. The only pure people in Europe are the Basques. They even have a unique blood type, and to this day we don't know where this people comes from. They have probably been here forever, and they are treated as they are. The Irish too, but as a remnant of the Celtic nations. It's eugenics. Eugenical are also very popular genetic tests for pets. How many Labradors are in a Labrador? For those who truly love, it shouldn't matter. From what I remember from my veterinary studies, the Labrador was created as a result of a combination of a continental pointer with local dogs and dogs on ships. A pointer will always appear in his genotype, and there is no need to despair about it, because it is the initial genetic type. They probably don't have genetics as developed as we in biology in schools. What we have in secondary schools, they have in university. Unfortunately. Think that everyone should know how to determine whether their child can inherit a genetic disease if he suffers from it himself, but it will also turn out to be a roulette wheel for the fanciest ones. Some will be in every other generation. Others of a specific sex in the family. We'll leave that for another topic. However, not everyone should play God and use genetics without any knowledge. Right, gone are the days when noses were measured and their width was a sign of lack of intelligence or not. And let them not come back. Periodic research at work is also eugenics. If they were concerned about health, they would look different. I think everyone knows if they are able to work or not in a given position. A woman weighing 60 kilograms will not go voluntarily to carry bricks. If she's stupid, but then don't scream about uterine prolapse in old age. Research in school is also eugenics. Checking that the baby is developing well. Often with the whole class. Eugenics is really starting to distort conscious parenting. We have plenty of sex advisors who only know BDSM or the Kama Sutra and put a lot of candles in the bedroom. At the same time, promoting abortion, which should be legal, but we are not talking about the fact that castration stops the aging process. Interestingly, one of the influential Danish feminists told me that menopause follows castration. It's amazing that this person studied zoology. It's not true. Because of castration, your brain doesn't get the message that menopause or andropause should happen, because that's really the only hormonal information that these organs send to the brain. We don't need them if we don't want to breed, but castration and even sterilization are prohibited in many countries. By no means do we promote castration of anyone, but we explain how it really works. However, we would like to inform you that once only castrates performed in operas. They had flocks of women and indeed lived longer than average men. Farinelli is perhaps the most famous. Castration should be a personal decision, not as Sweden and the United States have done, by a state decision, for clean population. Another castration myth is that if you castrate a sex offender, he or she won't do it again. Women can be also pedophiles, and they can enjoy it with both girls and boys. This is quite a taboo topic. I'm guessing anyone who has brushed up on criminology knows this. Unfortunately for our children, we also perpetuate the myth that only priests are pedophiles. No, pedophilia has no profession. In terms of drives, the uterus or testicles are not our brain, but the brainies responsible for it. Castration absolutely does not change the personality of either humans or animals. People still believe, moreover, doctors repeat that holding your legs up will make the sperm flow into the uterus. People have no idea that you can get pregnant during your period, or that spermatozoan can be in the ejaculate. They don't know that for a month after castration a man is fertile or after a vasectomy. The flagship slogan is abortion, but even this may not be feasible in the case of certain diseases. Quite rarely, but maybe. This is also not mentioned. A vasectomy can be different, either by incision or by ligation. Same as sterilization. Feminists do not even fight for the latter. They do not fight, because someone pays in advance for organizations like any other, and then the organization preaches what the principal wants. Again, there are slogans that the incompetent and the poor should be castrated because the poor produce lots of children. I know rich families who also produce children. The difference can only be then in the adult's approach. Some people consider it an honor to come from a poor family with many children and thanks working hard they will achieve something. At a certain level, they discover that connections are also important, not only education and hard work, which cannot create you rich, and they experience a shock. These people like to emphasize that only children are selfish, while it is precisely in families with many children that there is a fierce struggle for inheritance after the death of relatives. And in families of noble birth there have been wars many times because of this and still is happening. But no one of the subjects must follow to this hell with them. Selfishness is related to the ego, not to upbringing. It is also a myth that in large families parents do not devote as much time to children as in smaller ones. Nowadays, when happiness from work takes up most of our lives, also thanks to the eugenic good, that our children, already in diapers, gone under greater protection of the state, which will shape them as it wants, and not the family, it does not matter. The brutal law of Constantinople, which applied not only to Byzantium or the heirs of the Ottomans, but also most of Asia as well the Russian principalities, was created precisely in response to the problem of having many children and the fact that the army would overthrow rulers and destroy the nation with civil wars in order to have the heir to the throne that will meet their demands. It was a brutal higher good which protect population. And I truly agree with historians that the introduction of the cafes began the decline of the empire. It's does not the secret that WHO is behind all this, but not just that institution, many are hidden, and created just for damaged society, are political. Anyway, I think that we already has seen how that institution work. This institution has already shown everyone that it does not fulfill its role, but it costs us a lot. I really don't like Mr. Trump, but I agree with him on this one point. This institution needs to be reorganized or abolished. It absolutely does not fulfill its role, but those who work there makes huge money in it and has an impact on politics as well. However much try to make this distinction between negative and positive eugenics, the line is actually broken. Eugenics is dangerous, but it has catchy slogans, although it does not really care about our health, but about creating an outstanding human being, a cyborg. Not only human. Eugenics, like all medical science, began story with animals. Finally, it was eugenics that divided us into ethnic groups, linguistic groups, cultural groups. Since it was already doing this in the 19th century, as we know today, it is completely wrong idea, and these theses have been refuted. Especially when we're talking about Europe. Eugenics further influences the fate of animals through kennel clubs. Yes, we see beautiful photos of breeders who take pictures with pedigree dogs from Ukraine, but when you ask about a dog of this breed staying in a shelter, they get crazy. The lecture begins about the lack of a tattoo, a chip, and that there are only mongrels in shelters. This is of course not true. They just don't have paper. Not only that, they often have a chip, but the equipment, especially in Eastern European countries, can only read local numbers. These dogs miss their chance to return home. Pseudokennel also breeds purebred dogs, and the living conditions of animals depend solely on humans. I also know breeders who only see money in their animals and do not care about the fate of their animals. Historically, the beginnings of human racialism, eugenics are considered to be animal exhibitions and breeders of purebred animals that have dangerously moved to our world. There are plenty of animals in shelters. They all ended up there because of human error. Because of behaviorists who say that a dog should meow on command. Because of the belief that animals only get used to us because we feed them. Because of the eternal myth of a divine being who rules the world, not governs it. Due to the fact that although in the Middle Ages animals could have a trial, today they have indeed been reduced to objects that can be replaced when we change the carpet. We keep hearing that animals should be taken for medical tests because human welfare is more important, but these tests are not adequate. Almost no one says that, because with a lot of research we would return to what the Germans did during World War II. In the zoo, they are museum objects like statue. The FCI absolutely does not care about the welfare of animals. The FCI and any organization of that type are like the WHO, a wit of fate. In fact, to some extent, they are right. All dogs are mongrels. The fact that they became purebred is only due to the fact that a man dreamed of such an appearance of an animal, or he liked it. He perpetuated this look in the process of breeding, often incestuous at first, and then inscribed it on the list. That hasn't changed. What's worse, eugenics with the help of behaviorists begins to tell us that a dog cannot bite. In some countries, being bitten by a dog or a stranger means euthanasia. It's as stupid as a lawmaker who probably never dealt with a dog. A scared dog can bite even the man he loves. It acts in passion, just as a man kills in passion. Certainly this is partly due to the fact that while Catholicism saw something in animals, Protestantism saw nothing but an object. And just as an object is treated in the light of law and by man. The sad news is that people are not much different from dogs and cats, and I will even say after Einstein, stupidity is a human disease. I have not met it in the animal world. Me neither, and I've been alive for almost half a century. Cats have the right to scratch, and clipping their claws should be punishable. When a cat jumps on a piece of furniture and does not aim, it will fall. Cats don't always land on their feet. Where will the paralyzed cat end up? At the comfort of his man, at the shelter. Animals are given for Christmas, but there are also cues to veterinarians to put down the previous old animal, because it no longer fits the look of the house, or it got bored, or lived too long, and a beautiful puppy has been seen by a child. After all, you also have to go on vacation. Animal harm has been done in the process of eugenics and behaviorism. They were domesticated, and thus lost the ability to survive in the wild. Young cats will survive, but old ones will not, which is often forgotten. The historical truth is that without the horse, dog and cat, man would still be sitting in the legendary cave. They built civilization together with humans, whether one likes it or not, and for that reason alone they deserve respect. No living creature is a thing. Attitude to animals can be seen in languages. In English, it is referred to as it, which is a non-personal form. Something. In Russian, every living creature is she or he. You cannot use the equivalent of it to a living being. German articles work in a similar way. Animals are also not just moving muscles, and therefore meat. Such statements can be heard from politicians from the frontiers of the European Union. It is true that they are related to the nationalist parties, but you can hear that. Apart from the lack of education here, it is astonishing that the government does nothing about such statements. Hence the simple way to announce that man is also meat. It is true that the authors of the statements here refer sometimes to the lack of a soul, but again they do not know the Bible. It certainly hurts here the lack of a certain fragment from Torah, which talks about why God forbade animals to talk to a sinful being. Apart from the fact that the existence of the soul has not been confirmed by anyone. This dogma appeared in the Latins, and therefore not in the original Eastern churches. Late, at the end of the Middle Ages. Another interesting fact is abortion in 9 months of pregnancy. Biological knowledge is also lacking here. This is the left side. This is murder, because all the organs are developed. The fetus removed from the womb will live on its own. I also doubt that anyone would undertake it, because I see the possibility only through a caesarean section. Abortion doesn't happen like that. And it can also be dangerous for the mother. If that person gives away, we can discuss. For now, it's just propaganda to get votes. Indeed, at the moment I do not see the possibility of performing an abortion in the 9th month of pregnancy. It's the birthing season. There was only one reason why she burst into tears and whimpered out that there are no more wars in Europe and everything is done politely by talking. It was pathetic, but it showed how elite we are. A good politician wouldn't behave like that. Especially the leader of a supposedly superpower. They will probably say that in Europe people don't eat human flesh. That doesn't mean it can't be changed. Just like creating a war plot. Another conclusion could be drawn from this statement. Here Europe has shown that you can kill everywhere else, because something worse lives there, but not with us. We will of course sponsor this by sending our arms products. In a way, it was an admission of many crimes of recent years. In the process of adaptation to human life, a domestic animal received a psyche equal to that of a child. Unfortunately for animals, just cats discover that better is not listen human to the end. He can betray. The problem is that people are increasingly moving away from nature and do not understand either the nature of a dog or a small child. At the same time, the so-called specialists tell them what to do. Indeed, a baby does not need to go to ballet lessons, because he does not understand any of it. Children will forget their entire lives by the age of 3. They don't need museum tours in that age. Someone is making money off of it, sure. A lot of. Someone will certainly be offended by comparing his outstanding child to a dog. It's just scientifically proven. I'm sorry. If you want to know why your children or pets are scallywag, just spend more time with them. They will cease to be. Well, the money is flowing out of the account. You have to choose something. Those from animals then tell people that it's innate aggression when they have no idea what to do. Landseer and Lorenz are turning in their graves with Frederick the Great. There is no such thing as innate aggression in pets, because we killed it in the breeding process, and someone smarter and much more knowledgeable about the psyche of animals will tell it to you, because he also has this subject in University of Veterinarian. He really learn it longer. However, no one listens to him anymore, but a man who had a serious conflict with the law, beat his wife and enforces obedience by brutally sticking his fingers between the ribs, i.e. he stabs the liver. The most tender place already. It's on TV after all, so after him they will follow. In the process of adaptation to human life, a domestic animal received a psyche equal to that of a child. Unfortunately for animals, just cats discover that better is not listen human to the end. He can betray. The problem is that people are increasingly moving away from nature and do not understand either the nature of a dog or a small child. At the same time, the so-called specialists tell them what to do. Indeed, a baby does not need to go to ballet lessons, because he does not understand any of it. Children will forget their entire lives by the age of 3. They don't need museum tours in that age. Someone is making money off of it, sure. A lot of. Someone will certainly be offended by comparing his outstanding child to a dog. It's just scientifically proven. I'm sorry. If you want to know why your children or pets are scallywag, just spend more time with them. They will cease to be. Well, the money is flowing out of the account. You have to choose something. Those from animals then tell people that it's innate aggression when they have no idea what to do. Landseer and Lorenz are turning in their graves with Frederick the Great. There is no such thing as innate aggression in pets, because we killed it in the breeding process, and someone smarter and much more knowledgeable about the psyche of animals will tell it to you, because he also has this subject in University of Veterinarian. He really learn it longer. However, no one listens to him anymore, but a man who had a serious conflict with the law, beat his wife and enforces obedience by brutally sticking his fingers between the ribs, i.e. he stabs the liver. The most tender place already. It's on TV after all, so after him they will follow. Such a strange unwritten nuisance when you take up an important public position. Something that is forgotten. There should be more control over it. The system of reporting sick people by the family is not entirely good. Also applying yourself. There should be something created in the middle. Apparently people don't want to think about it. Better delete it. If you wanted to think, the problem would be solved. Certainly, some branches of psychology are needed. Criminology is especially needed. However, before someone takes advice, someone who is supposed to rummage in his head. Let him remember that according to the law, what he said to him may see the light of day if someone finds it necessary. Let him see if his family is indeed functioning well. There is nothing worse than a bad advisor. Let the bad advisor roll, not drag us down. Charlatans from these fields should be removed for our good. Let's not go to a charlatan who drinks vodka under the table, can't handle his own children, divorces after a month, and gives us advice on how to live. Psychology should also go back to the source and start with elementary research, to determine whether mental illness is not a consequence of genetic disease, cancer, malfunctioning organs, or simply loss of minerals. I don't know if they've heard of metabolic cancer, those who I know for sure not, but there is indeed something that is almost undetectable, and it's increasingly being said that certain intestinal diseases are actually symptoms of just that. Metabolic cancer exists, but it is detected when it has destroyed the entire body and metastasized. Psychology must finally stop being a political instrument as well, but as in any system of the country. Especially these people write on behalf of foundations, governments, to instill in us what we should think. They too have to make a living. Addiction therapists need to stop judging. Not all people have to blindly love everyone around them, just to make it easier for power to function. These theses from the 19th century, which are closer to eugenics, born eugenics, it is time to remove them, since we supposedly have modern medicine. It is supposed to explain who an introvert is, but they are eliminated from the life of the community, just like people with autism and mutism. Indeed, in certain stages of these diseases there is no contact with these people, but in many is. It is true that finding a job for someone with Down syndrome is still often close to a miracle, no matter in what type of country we live in. Some individual will break through. Yes. It's always worth that some individual to break through, for propaganda that everything works great. After all, we're in the 21st century. Well, that's individual and so on. We return to the starting point. The brain, however, is not objective, and people love to judge before they know the cause. Psychology must also begin to look at human nature, not just follow sociology, and go back to medicine. Unfortunately, eugenics is not only a philosophy, but also a science. This is the only area that, unfortunately, still shows semi-syncretism and still affects our fate and is still dangerous. What was it in recent years if not eugenics? Now the question is how they will use this data. At the beginning of the 20th century, the fragmentation of knowledge reached a critical level and humanity faced a crisis of meaning, which was exacerbated by wars. The disintegration of values became more and more visible. Western rationalism, and thus civilization, was based on 4 assumptions: time, space, causation, and personality. They were supposed to be fixed and unchanging, but in fact they were always changeable. Since man introduced measurements, time seemed to be tamed. Also, the distance was in theory constant, but it is variable when we fly, for example, by plane. One way is always faster. Time and space are no longer limited to clocks and maps. Conventions are back to what they are, conventions. Psychology backfired. It demonstrated the impossibility of determining human motivations, highlighting the ambivalence of behaviors that do not lend themselves to simple equations of cause and effect. This new instability also radiated into the morality that used to be based on a system of punishments and rewards. Punishment ceased to be the result of a crime, as the Second World War proved when, under the protection of governments, war criminals with knowledge were not punished. Sociology presents personality as something like accumulating layers of reflexes, conditioned by environment and genetics. It has been discovered that personality can change under the influence of experiences, drugs, or surgery. Let's not forget the trendy lobotomy treatment. Thanks God, much forbidden today. Brainwashing was born.